I believe in the afterlife. I decided to talk about it so that those who have lost their close relatives and beloved friends could also be convinced that all of them did not die, but continue to live. Confirmation of belief in the afterlife can be found in world religions. But I also understand that for many people this is not enough. Having witnessed hundreds of tragedies, I have the privilege of seeing how in the last minutes of life a veil seems to be lifted in front of the departing person. And what the dying person sees behind it immediately calms them down, says hospice nurse Julie McFadden. She worked in the intensive care unit for 8 years and has been a hospice nurse for almost the same amount of time. This woman often hears questions about whether she has encountered anything unusual during her work. Julie McFadden admits, working as a hospice nurse, I saw supernatural things when dying people did the seemingly impossible. Julie McFadden calls the most unusual and impressive case that happened to one of the young hospice patients. This man was not yet 30 years old. He spent the last 6 months of his life in the hospice. Not everyone can afford to stay in a hospice. It requires a lot of money. This young man had it. He was a difficult patient. All his life he was engaged in hoarding. And it was difficult for him to accept the idea that he would have to part with the benefits that he had. In the hospice, this young man was rarely visited by friends and even more rarely by relatives, says Julie McFadden. Seeing that loneliness was oppressing this patient, Julie often talked to him. Soon the young man began to consider her his friend. He shared with Julie all the feelings that were bothering him. The main one was the fear of death. The young man often asked about what the dying experience and what awaits them after death. When Julie McFadden began to understand that this patient would soon pass away, she provided him with round-the-clock care. A nurse was on duty with him all the time. Julie McFadden asked her to immediately inform her when this patient would pass away. That day, Julie McFadden was not in the hospice. Julie got into the car and was getting ready to go somewhere. At that moment, she again remembered her patient. Julie McFadden mentally said goodbye to him. Suddenly, the voice of this young man sounded in her head. He said, "Julie, if I only knew, I would not be afraid of this." The voice stopped suddenly. Julie McFadden looked around and made sure that there was no one else in the car except her. Then her phone buzzed. Julie McFadden opened the message that had arrived. The nurse on duty said that the young man had died. Reading the message, I thought, I already know because he just told me himself. This incident seemed so amazing to me that for several years I did not dare to tell anyone about it, except my best friend Jenny. I trusted her with this secret because I knew that she would not call me crazy. It was this incident that made me believe in the existence of the afterlife, Julie McFadden notes. And it was this incident that made the hospice nurse be more attentive to her patients. And her observations of the dying allowed her to identify several signs indicating that a person is close to death. All these signs Julie McFadden calls the deathbed phenomenon. Julie McFadden says she has seen hundreds of people die. According to the hospice nurse, in the last days of life, the dying often behave the same and say the same things. Julie McFadden describes in detail such deathbed phenomena as deathbed lucidity, visions, the choice of time of death, the death gesture and the death look. According to Julie McFadden, often in the last days of life, the dying person begins to experience a state of extreme lucidity. This is a state when a person is clearly conscious and experiences a surge of energy. Amazing things happen to such people. They wake up with a good appetite, some of them get out of bed, start walking, talking, laughing. However, the surge of energy does not last long. Many patients die within a few hours or days after the ultimate lucidity. This happens to a third of our hospice patients. We try to tell the family before it happens, so that the sudden death of a loved one after a few days of good health does not devastate them, explains Julie McFadden. Julie McFadden includes visions as another sign of imminent death. She compares them to hallucinations, which often make the patient restless, cause panic. Visions before death, according to Julie McFadden, are a completely different experience. Often, people have them a few weeks before death. People can have a conversation with their living relatives, while at the same time seeing someone from the dead, standing in the corner and smiling. Usually, such visions are very calming for hospice patients. And the best thing to do in this situation is to support your dying relative or friend who has experienced something like this. This is normal, and there is nothing to worry about. However, it is important to understand that when people start having these visions, they are about a month away from death, says Julie McFadden. 2 more signs of approaching death, according to the hospice nurse's observations, often go hand in hand. Julie McFadden calls them the death stare and the death gesture. Julie says that her patients often predict exactly when they will die. The hospice nurse got the impression that such people themselves choose the time of their death. Julie McFadden witnessed cases when people simply said, "I am going to die tonight, I know it, I feel it." And that's what happened. Some people wait until they are surrounded by family and friends to die. In other cases, patients wait until their loved ones leave the room to die. Finally, someone wants to live until some important event, for example, until a birthday or a wedding. And only then do they leave their body. Perhaps my observations will help people be less afraid of death. There are a lot of unknowns at the end of life, and I think that's what makes people afraid. But the more I talk to people who are dying, the less afraid I am. I see firsthand the different things that happen at the end of life that give us comfort and hope. Regularly seeing hospice patients has made me less afraid of death. That's why I'm passing this information on to you. Hopefully, it will make you less afraid, too, says Julie McFadden.